discover the dramatic and jaw-dropping journey of how four distinct nations, England, including Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Ireland, came together to form what we now call the United Kingdom. We'll travel through centuries of conquest, treaty, union, rebellion, and empire building, uncovering the lesser-known twists and turning points. From the medieval English-Welsh annexation, the personal union of crowns in 1603, the ground-shaking Acts of Union 1707, the union with Ireland in 1801, the rise of a global empire, and finally the modern UK of today. Prepare for an epic story of power, identity, conflict, and unity. If you're fascinated by history, politics, and how nations form, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to never miss a deep dive like this. Imagine four ancient nations, each with its own rulers, laws, identities. Yet somehow they converged, merged, fought, negotiated, and eventually formed one of the most powerful states in history. That is the story of the United Kingdom. But how did this happen? What were the forces, the personalities, the sacrifices behind this union? And why does it matter today more than ever? The modern nation of the United Kingdom is not simply the result of one treaty or one war. It was born from centuries of conquest, union, and identity shifting. England and Wales had been entwined for centuries. Scotland remained an independent rival, Ireland harboring its own sovereign ambitions. Over time, though, strategic marriages, wars, politics, and global ambition pulled them together. The pivotal moment came on the 1st of May, 1707, when the kingdoms of England, with Wales and Scotland, were formally united through the Acts of Union 1707. That union created the Kingdom of Great Britain. Later, with the Acts of Union 1800, Ireland joined and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland was born. But this was not just a matter of legal paperwork. It was about identity. It was about economic power, merging trade, navigation, and colonial reach. It was about religion, culture, and class. And it was about empire, the new power that these four nations would project to the world. In this video, we will travel through those turning points. How England absorbed Wales, how Scotland came to join, how Ireland entered and later separated, how empire lifted Britain to global dominance, and how today the four nations still debate the meaning of union, independence, and identity. So if you've ever wondered why the UK is made up of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, or what held them together and what still pulls them apart, you're in the right place. The stage is set in the British Isles long before any idea of United Kingdom. Diverse peoples, Celtic Britons, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans, shaped the map and the politics. Over centuries, a mosaic of kingdoms covered the Isles. England emerging from Anglo-Saxon consolidation, Wales holding on, Scotland forging its own path, Ireland divided among Gaelic kingdoms and Norman overlords. As monarchs sought power and unity, territorial ambitions collided. Wales was gradually brought under English control via the laws in Wales Acts of 1535 and 1542, formally uniting Wales with England. In 1603, a landmark moment arrived. When the childless English queen died, the Scottish king became monarch of England too, creating a personal union that set the stage for full political union. But personal union wasn't enough. Political, legal, economic, and religious integration would take decades. Scotland faced economic crisis, England faced the threat of French alliances, and the new union seemed appealing to leaders weary of conflict. By the early 1700s, negotiations and treaties began, culminating in 1707. The union changed more than flags or parliaments. It changed trade, migration, law, and identity. subjects of the new kingdom became British in a new sense. Yet the story doesn't end there. Ireland's union in 1801 and the later split of much of Ireland in 1922 shows this union was messy, contested, and evolving. In the centuries that followed, that united power built an empire, 1/4 of the globe at its height. But with empire came contradictions. With 2 world wars came decline, and with devolution came new questions of identity. That's the story of 4 nations becoming one power. A story of ambition and union, of identity and conflict, of power and purpose. And by the end, we'll also ask, what does that mean for the UK today and for its future? To understand how the United Kingdom began, we must first explore how England and Wales became one. This is the foundation, the first major building block of a future union. The story is not one of mutual agreement or peaceful compromise. It's one of conquest, legislation, and slow cultural erasure met with resistance. In 1282, King Edward I of England launched a brutal military campaign against the last remaining Welsh principality of Gwynedd. With the death of Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, the last native prince of Wales, Edward's forces effectively ended Welsh independence. Castles were built across the land, symbolizing English dominance, many of which still stand today, imposing and unmistakable. But conquest was just the beginning. Over the next 2 centuries, English control over Wales was patchy. Some regions were ruled directly by English lords, others were governed by traditional Welsh laws. It wasn't until the reign of Henry VIII, himself of Welsh ancestry, that full legal union was forced. The laws in Wales Acts of 1535 and 1542 officially annexed Wales into the Kingdom of England. These acts abolished the Welsh legal system and replaced it with English law. Welsh was banned from official use in the courts. The land was now governed directly from Westminster, and Welsh MPs were sent to the English Parliament, though Wales as a nation had no say in the process that took away its autonomy. It was absorption, not negotiation. Still, Welsh identity endured. Language and cultural traditions survived underground, passed down through families, churches, and poetry. The 19th century saw a resurgence in Welsh pride through religious revivals, education, and eventually a national movement. But for centuries, Wales was simply seen as part of England, legally erased but never truly extinguished. This first union, England and Wales, set a precedent, unification through dominance, not partnership. It laid the groundwork for future unions and sowed the seeds for the tensions still felt today. And while this chapter is often overshadowed by the more dramatic unions with Scotland and Ireland, it remains the oldest and most misunderstood link in the chain that would become the United Kingdom. For centuries, England and Scotland were fierce rivals, 2 distinct kingdoms with separate languages, religions, economies, and identities. Their borders were battlegrounds, their monarchs were enemies, and their ambitions frequently collided. But through a combination of war, dynastic succession, economic desperation, and political negotiation, these 2 nations would unite, forever altering the fate of the British Isles. The shift began in 1603 with the death of Elizabeth I. With no heir, the English throne passed to her cousin, James VI of Scotland. He became James I of England, uniting the crowns but not the countries, a personal union. England and Scotland remained legally and politically independent, but tensions were inevitable. James dreamed of a united Britain, but Parliament refused. Over the next century, tensions exploded. Religious conflict during the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution of 1688 deepened the divide. But economics would do what war could not. After the catastrophic failure of the Darien scheme, Scotland's attempt to build a colony in Panama. The country was nearly bankrupt. At the same time, England sought to prevent Scotland from aligning with France, its perennial enemy. In 1707, both parliaments passed the Acts of Union, creating the Kingdom of Great Britain. Scotland gave up its independent parliament but kept its legal and educational systems. England secured its northern border and economic unity. In return, Scottish elites were compensated, some say bribed, and given access to England's vast colonial trade networks. The union was wildly unpopular among ordinary Scots. Riots erupted in Edinburgh and Glasgow. Protest literature flooded the streets. Many saw it as a betrayal, a sellout of national sovereignty. But over time, Scotland's economy began to benefit from imperial trade and industrial development. The Scottish Enlightenment flourished, producing thinkers like David Hume and Adam Smith. Yet, even as Scotland contributed immensely to the new British identity, its own national consciousness never disappeared. The 1707 Union was not a merger of equals in the eyes of many. It was a forced marriage, one that would in time be reconsidered by future generations. Ireland's path into the United Kingdom was unlike that of Wales or Scotland. It wasn't driven by shared crowns or negotiated treaties. It was forged through centuries of colonization, rebellion, and brutal suppression. The union with Ireland in 1801 was not a peaceful blending of nations, but a response to chaos, bloodshed, and geopolitical pressure. English influence in Ireland began as far back as the 12th century, when Norman barons invaded and seized land. For centuries, Ireland remained a contested colony, with the native Gaelic lords resisting English control. The Tudor monarchs intensified efforts to Anglicize Ireland, enforcing Protestantism and settling English and Scottish Protestants in Irish lands, especially in the north. These plantations sowed deep divisions between Catholic natives and Protestant settlers. The 17th century brought devastating wars, including Cromwell's brutal campaign and the Williamite War. By the 18th century, Ireland had a Protestant ruling class loyal to London and a disenfranchised Catholic majority. The Irish Parliament existed, but it was subservient to Britain and Catholics. The majority couldn't vote, hold office, or own land freely. In 1798, inspired by the French and American revolutions, the United Irishmen, a revolutionary group seeking to unite Catholics and Protestants, launched a massive rebellion. The British government responded with overwhelming force. The chaos convinced many in power that Ireland could not be trusted to govern itself. In 1801, the Acts of Union were passed, abolishing the Irish Parliament and creating the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. As with Scotland, elite cooperation was secured, some say bought. But unlike Scotland, there was no broad economic benefit or cultural blending. Instead, the Union deepened sectarian tensions and fueled nationalist resentment. For more than a century, Ireland remained part of the UK, but rebellion and resistance never stopped. The Easter Rising in 1916, the War of Independence, and the eventual partition in 1921 split the island. The Irish Free State was born in the south, but Northern Ireland remained, and remains, part of the United Kingdom. This incomplete union still shapes British and Irish politics today. Once the union of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland was complete, the United Kingdom turned outward and reshaped the world. From the 18th to early 20th centuries, the UK built the largest empire in human history, covering 1/4 of the Earth's surface. This empire wasn't just about land. It was about trade, ideology, control, and power. And it was made possible only because the four nations had become one. The British Empire grew through war, diplomacy, colonization, and often brutal exploitation. India became the jewel in the crown, ruled by a viceroy and governed by British officials. Africa was carved up during the scramble for Africa. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other colonies formed the White Dominions, settled heavily by the British and given a special status within the empire. The unity of the four nations under a single government made this vast expansion possible. Scottish engineers, Welsh miners, Irish soldiers, and English merchants all played key roles in building imperial infrastructure, enforcing colonial rule, and profiting from global trade. The empire, in many ways, masked internal differences between the UK's nations by giving them a shared external project. But this imperial unity came with a cost. At home, industrialization surged, cities swelled, and class divisions deepened. Abroad, colonies were often exploited for resources and labor. Indigenous populations were displaced or subjected to horrific violence, as in Kenya, India, and Ireland. The British Empire brought railroads and administration, but also rebellion, famine, and repression. For the UK, the empire became its global identity. London became the financial heart of the world. English became a global language. British institutions, education systems, and legal codes were exported across continents. The sense of Britishness was now wrapped in imperial pride. And yet, cracks began to show. From the late 19th century onward, colonized peoples began to push back. Nationalist movements, independence struggles, and world wars would challenge and eventually dismantle the very empire that had helped keep the Union cohesive. The story of the UK's rise to power would soon be followed by an equally dramatic decline. As the British Empire began to unravel, so too did the unifying force it once provided. The 20th century brought not just global upheaval, but internal cracks that shook the very idea of a united kingdom. War, economic collapse, rising nationalism, and shifting identities exposed long-simmering tensions within the four nations, tensions that would never fully go away. World War I devastated the British Isles, claiming nearly 1 million lives. In its aftermath, Ireland exploded into open rebellion. The 1916 Easter Rising and the War of Independence that followed forced Britain to negotiate the partition of Ireland. In 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty split the island. The Irish Free State would become independent, while 6 counties in the north remained within the UK. The result was a fractured union and a legacy of violence that would haunt the next century. World War II temporarily restored a sense of unity, but by the 1950s and 60s, the empire was crumbling. India gained independence. African and Caribbean nations followed. With the imperial project fading, the question returned: what bound the UK's nations together now? The answer became more fragile with every passing decade. Economic decline in the 1970s hit Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland especially hard. As coal mines closed and industries collapsed, resentment toward the central government in Westminster grew. In Northern Ireland, sectarian violence erupted into the Troubles, a bloody conflict that lasted 3 decades and claimed over 3,500 lives. British soldiers patrolled the streets of Belfast. Bombing shook London. The Union was literally bleeding. In response to rising discontent, reforms began. The late 1990s saw the most significant constitutional changes in the UK's history since the 1707 Union. Scotland and Wales voted for devolved parliaments. Northern Ireland's Good Friday Agreement brought an uneasy peace, granting shared governance. Suddenly, the UK was no longer ruled solely from London. Power was fragmented and identity was up for debate. The Union was no longer unbreakable. Instead, it became conditional, held together by economic ties, political compromise, and national pride. But the very reforms meant to preserve the UK also reminded its nations of their individual power. and that would have consequences in the decades to come. The United Kingdom in the 21st century is a patchwork of identities, powers, and political ambitions. It may be a single country on the world stage, but inside it behaves more like a fragile federation. Each nation, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, walks a different path, with its own institutions, parties, and identity debates. The Union remains, but it is contested, negotiated, and constantly evolving. Devolution has reshaped domestic politics. Scotland has its own parliament in Holyrood, with sweeping powers over education, health, and justice. Wales governs itself from the Senedd in Cardiff, gradually gaining more autonomy. Northern Ireland's assembly in Stormont, though often suspended, reflects a hard-won compromise between unionist and nationalist communities. England, ironically, has no separate parliament, and its dominance in population and politics fuels resentment elsewhere. Identity is complex. Census data shows that growing numbers in Scotland and Wales identify primarily as Scottish or Welsh, not British. In Northern Ireland, national identity is deeply tied to religion and community. Even within England, regional identities, Yorkshire, Cornish, Londoner, often rival a broader sense of Britishness. What it means to be British is no longer universally agreed. Political movements reflect this divide. The Scottish National Party, SNP, has dominated Scottish politics for over a decade, calling for a second independence referendum after Brexit, a decision most Scots opposed. In Wales, Plaid Cymru pushes for independence light. In Northern Ireland, calls for a united Ireland are growing louder, especially among younger voters. Brexit was a turning point. Voted for largely by English and Welsh voters, it exposed deep national divides. Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU, reigniting questions of sovereignty and union. If the UK can leave one union, many asked, why can't Scotland or Northern Ireland leave another? Today, the UK stands at a crossroads. It remains one of the world's most influential nations, but its internal bonds are under unprecedented strain. The forces that once unified the kingdom, empire, monarchy, global power, are no longer enough. What remains is a shared history, a common language, overlapping interests, and four nations, each asking if the Union still serves them. The story of the United Kingdom is one of ambition and union, but also of conquest, rebellion, and resistance. It is a tale of how four distinct nations, each with their own language, culture, and identity, were bound together by force, strategy, and necessity. But as we've seen, unity has never meant uniformity. The UK has always been more fragile than it appeared. Over the centuries, monarchs, ministers, merchants, and revolutionaries have all played roles in shaping the British state. From Edward I's conquest of Wales, to James VI's unifying crowns, to the bribed elites of 1707 and 1801, to the nationalist uprisings that fractured the Union. The UK's history is anything but simple. It's a long, winding story of power and compromise, identity and integration. Today, the future of the Union hangs in the balance. Scotland's calls for independence grow stronger. Northern Ireland inches closer to reunification talks. Wales, long silent, is finding its voice. Even within England, regionalism and political divides stir new questions. The idea of Britishness is changing, splintering, reforming. The bonds that held the UK together in an age of empire may not be enough in an age of self-determination. But this isn't just about politics, it's about people. The millions who live between these borders and carry layered, complex identities. It's about belonging, about memory, about choice. The UK's past can't be undone, but its future hasn't been written yet. Will the four nations remain one power, Or will they choose different paths forward, apart? History doesn't predict the future, but it warns us. It teaches that unions must evolve, that power must be shared, and that identity, once ignored or suppressed, always returns. Whatever happens next, one truth remains. This story, the story of how four nations became one power, is far from over. If you found this journey through history eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind nations, and let us know in the comments, should the United Kingdom stay united or go its separate ways?